The darkness was absolute, but her voice cut through it like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I couldn't see her face, couldn't remember my own name, couldn't even feel my own body. But that voice, God, that voice was everything. It was honey and sea salt, laughter and tears, home and adventure, all wrapped into syllables that somehow made sense in a world that had become completely senseless. Alexandros, she whispered, and suddenly I knew that was me, even though everything else was gone, erased, wiped clean like chalk from a blackboard. Alexandros, you have to come back to us. You have to come back to me. If you've ever wondered what it's like to lose everything and find the only thing that matters in the same moment, keep listening, because this story will change how you see love, memory, and what it really means to be alive. And if you're already feeling something stir in your chest, hit that like button, because you're about to hear something that will stay with you long after this video ends. I was Alexandros Dimitri. Before the accident, though, I wouldn't remember that for weeks. 28 years old, heir to the Dimitri shipping empire that had ruled the Mediterranean for 3 generations. My great-grandfather had started with a single fishing boat off the coast of Mykonos, working 16-hour days under a sun that could kill you if you weren't careful, hands bleeding from rope burns and salt spray. He'd named that first boat Hagia Sophia after his wife, who died giving birth to their only son. My grandfather Dimitri had inherited his father's work ethic, but not his contentment with small dreams. By the time he was 30, he owned 5 boats. By 40, he had a small fleet serving the Greek islands. By the time he died at 73, he owned shipping routes that stretched from Gibraltar to the Black Sea, from Morocco to Turkey, carrying everything from olive oil and wine to electronics and automobiles. My father, Nikos Dimitriou, had taken that foundation and built an empire that made the ancient maritime kingdoms look like weekend fishing trips. By the time I was born, we owned ports in Piraeus, Thessaloniki, and Crete, luxury yachts that celebrities fought to charter, and a private island that made Scorpios look like a postage stamp. Our company, Dimitri Maritime Holdings, controlled shipping lanes that carried 15% of all Mediterranean trade, employed over 10,000 people directly, and another 50,000 indirectly through partnerships and subsidiaries. But money, I've learned, can't buy you back from the dead. And that's exactly where I was heading on that August night when everything changed. When someone decided that the world would be better off without Alexandros Dimitriou in it. The last thing I truly remember before her voice became my anchor was the dinner party at our family's estate in Ekili, just north of Athens. The kind of party where cabinet ministers rubbed shoulders with shipping magnates, where supermodels posed for photos with tech entrepreneurs, where billion-dollar deals were discussed over glasses of wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Our estate sprawled across 40 hectares of prime real estate, complete with its own vineyard, olive groves that had been producing oil for over 2 centuries, and a main house that had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. The olive trees that lined our property were heavy with fruit that August evening, their silver-green leaves rustling in the warm breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and wild thyme from the hills beyond. The pool area, where most of the party was centered, glowed with soft golden lights that reflected off the water like fallen stars. Traditional Greek music drifted from hidden speakers, mixed with conversations in Greek, English, French, German, and what I would later learn was Mandarin. Because the Chinese shipping delegation had arrived that afternoon, to discuss expanding our routes to include direct service to Shanghai and Hong Kong. I was wearing my lucky white linen shirt, the one my mother had bought me during our last family vacation to Santorini, where we'd watched the sunset from the clifftop village of Ohio, and she'd told me stories about the ancient Minoan civilization that had once ruled these waters. The shirt was perfectly tailored, made from fabric so fine it felt like wearing a cloud, and it had become my go-to choice for important occasions because Isadora had once said it made my eyes look like the Aegean on a perfect summer day. I said do-ra. Even then, in those last moments before my world exploded into fragments, I was thinking about her. She wasn't at the party that night. Something about a research expedition to catalogue recently discovered Roman amphorae near Delos. But I could still hear her laugh in my memory, still smell her perfume on my shirt from when she'd kissed me goodbye that morning. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless tonight," she'd said, straightening my collar with those graceful fingers that could piece together pottery shards from 2,000 years ago, with the patience of a saint. "I know how these family events make you feel, but please don't go racing off into the night like some modern-day Odysseus trying to outrun his destiny." "When have I ever been reckless?" I'd asked, pulling her close and breathing in the scent of her hair, which always smelled like lavender and sea spray and something indefinably her. "Should I make a list?" She'd replied, but she was smiling when she said it, that smile that made me believe I could be better than I was, that made me want to be the kind of man who deserved to wake up next to her every morning for the rest of my life. I felt like I owned the world that night, and in many ways, I did. My father had just announced, in front of 200 of Greece's most powerful people, that I would be taking over the maritime division of our company, which meant controlling shipping routes that connected Europe to Asia, Africa to the Americas. At 28, I was about to become one of the most powerful men in international trade, responsible for moving goods worth billions of dollars across oceans that had been traveled by my family for 3 generations. "Alexandros, my boy," my father had said, raising his glass of aged metaxa in front of the assembled crowd. Politicians and plutocrats and power brokers who collectively controlled more wealth than some small countries. Today you become not just my son, but my successor. May you sail these waters with the wisdom of Poseidon, the courage of your ancestors, and the blessing of every sailor who has ever trusted his life to the sea." The applause was thunderous, echoing off the marble columns of our terrace and rolling out over the carefully manicured gardens where peacocks wandered between ancient statues and modern sculptures. But all I could think about was getting away from the crowd, away from the expectations, away from the weight of a legacy I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. Don't get me wrong, I loved the sea, loved the feeling of wind and spray and endless horizon. But there's a difference between loving something and being owned by it. And sometimes I felt like the ocean was less my mistress and more my master, demanding sacrifices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. That's when I decided to take the cigarette boat out for a late-night run, though I wouldn't understand until much later that this decision had been anticipated, planned for, maybe even manipulated by people who knew me better than I knew myself. The cigarette was my pride and joy, a 42-foot racing machine that represented everything beautiful and dangerous about life on the water. She was built for speed, not comfort, with twin Mercury racing engines that could push her to 80 miles per hour on open water. Her hull was sleek as a shark, aerodynamic as a fighter jet, painted in deep blue that matched the Mediterranean at midnight. I'd named her Athena's Arrow because she was smart, beautiful, and deadly when she needed to be. Guided by wisdom, but powered by pure, unrelenting force. The boat had cost more than most people's houses, but she was worth every euro hand-laid. Carbon fiber construction, custom electronics package that could navigate in any weather, racing seats upholstered in Italian leather, and a sound system that could make Mozart sound like a religious experience even at full throttle. My friends always said I drove her like I was trying to catch the horizon, and maybe I was. Maybe I was always trying to outrun something. Though I couldn't have said what. The Aegean Sea at night is something you have to experience to understand. Something that photographs and videos can never quite capture. During the day, it's all postcards and tourism. Crystal clear water in shades of blue that don't have names, islands scattered like emeralds on silk. But after midnight, it becomes something ancient and primal, older than civilization, older than humanity itself. The water turns black as obsidian, broken only by the white foam of your wake, and the silver path the moon cuts across the surface, like a road to infinity. You can smell the salt and seaweed, mixed with wild herbs from the islands, and something else, something that might be the memory of every ship that ever sailed these waters. Every sailor who ever looked up at these same stars and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. You can feel the spray on your face, taste it on your lips, hear nothing but the roar of twin engines and your own heartbeats, and the whisper of wind across water that has been singing the same song since before humans learned to build boats. It's the closest thing to flying without leaving the earth, the closest thing to freedom without completely abandoning responsibility. Out there, with nothing but water and stars and the smell of eternity. You remember that you're part of something bigger than corporate empires and family legacies. You remember that your ancestors were explorers and adventurers, people who saw the horizon and decided to chase it, who built boats not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine living any other way. I should have known something was wrong when Dimitris, my usual crew member, called in sick that evening. Dimitris Kostas, not to be confused with my friend Kostas Petridis, had been with our family for 15 years. Ever since my father had hired him away from a competing shipping company with an offer too generous to refuse. He was 53 years old, built like a dock worker but educated like an engineer, capable of fixing anything mechanical and predicting weather patterns with an accuracy that sometimes seemed supernatural. Dimitris had taught me everything I knew about handling boats, from the basics of seamanship to the subtle art of reading water and wind, and the 1,000 tiny signs that tell you when the sea is about to turn dangerous. He'd been on the water since he was 12, starting as a deckhand on his uncle's fishing boat, working his way up through the ranks until he became one of the most respected marine engineers in the Eastern Mediterranean. More than that, he was a man who took pride in his reliability. In 15 years of working for my family, he'd never missed a sailing appointment, never called in sick, never failed to show up when he said he would. He lived by the old maritime code that said your word was your bond, your reputation was your most valuable possession, and letting down someone who depended on you was the worst sin a sailor could commit. So when his wife Maria called that evening to say he was suffering from food poisoning and wouldn't be able to crew for me that night, I should have recognized the warning sign. I should have postponed the trip, waited for him to recover, or at least found another experienced crew member to take his place. But I was 28, drunk on champagne and my own sense of invincibility, high on the success of the evening, and the promise of the future that stretched out before me like an uncharted ocean. I was also thinking about Isadora, About the ring I'd already purchased and hidden in my bedroom safe. About the proposal I was planning to make when she returned from her research expedition. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts, alone with the sea and the stars and the endless possibility of a life shared with the woman I loved more than my own existence, so I went alone. Just me, Athena's arrow, and the infinite darkness of the Mediterranean, racing toward a destiny I couldn't possibly have imagined. Have you ever made a decision that changed everything, that split your life into before and after, that turned you from one person into someone completely different? Comment below if you have, because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through that moment when fate decides to show you just how little control you really have. When the universe demonstrates that all our plans and preparations and careful calculations mean nothing when measured against the vast indifference of chance. The first hour was perfect. Everything I'd hoped it would be, and more. I pushed the cigarette through the waves at 60 miles per hour, feeling the hull skip across the water like a stone thrown by a giant's hand. Like something that had transcended the normal rules of physics and learned to dance on the surface. Of the sea, the lights of Athens faded behind me until they were just a golden glow on the horizon, a reminder of the land-bound world I was temporarily leaving behind. Ahead was nothing but stars reflected in water so calm it looked like a mirror, like the surface of some cosmic lake where gods might come to see their own faces. The Milky Way stretched overhead in all its ancient glory, the same constellations that had guided my ancestors across these same waters, the same stars that had looked down on Odysseus and Jason and all the legendary mariners who had made the Mediterranean their highway to adventure and fortune. I was heading toward Aegina, thinking I'd circle the island and be back before dawn, before anyone noticed I was gone, before the responsibilities of my new position crashed back down on me. Like a wave, Aegina was about 25 nautical miles from Athens, an easy run in good weather, and I knew every rock and reef between here and there. I'd made the trip dozens of times, sometimes with friends, sometimes with Isadora, sometimes alone when I needed to think or just wanted to feel the particular freedom that comes from being the only person for miles in any direction. The island has a special place in Greek mythology, named after the nymph Aegina, who was loved by Zeus himself, who carried her away from her home and made her the mother of Iolcus, the future king of the island. According to legend, Zeus populated the island by transforming ants into human beings, creating a race of people known for their industry and loyalty. It seemed appropriate, somehow, that I was heading toward a place born from divine love and supernatural transformation, though I couldn't have known how prophetic that choice would prove to be. The water was unusually calm that night, almost unnaturally smooth, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Usually, even on the calmest evenings, there's some chop, some reminder that you're traveling across a body of water that has moods and currents and a will of its own. But that night, the Aegean lay flat as glass, reflecting the stars so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the sea began. I should have recognized that as another warning sign. Old-time sailors know that unnatural calm can be more dangerous than storms, because it usually means something is coming. Some disturbance in the natural order that hasn't revealed itself yet. The sea doesn't like to be still, any more than the wind likes to be silent or the earth likes to be motionless. When nature holds its breath, wise people pay attention. But I was young and full of myself and thinking about diamond rings and marriage, proposals and the way Isadora's eyes lit. up when she talked about ancient civilizations lost beneath the waves. I was thinking about the life we were going to build together, the children we'd have, the adventures we'd share when I took her to all the hidden places I'd discovered in years of exploring these waters. That's when I saw the other boat. It came out of nowhere, running dark with no navigation lights, no radio chatter, no warning of any kind. One moment I was alone on a sea of glass under a canopy of stars. The next moment there was a vessel cutting across my path like it was trying to intersect my course. At first, it was just a shadow against the starlight, a disturbance in the perfect reflection of the sky on water. My initial thought was smugglers, drug runners using the Greek islands as stepping stones to move product from Turkey and the Middle East to Western Europe. It wouldn't be the first time I'd encountered them, and usually they avoided boats like mine, too expensive and too well known to be worth the trouble. Most smugglers prefer anonymity, want to blend into the background of legitimate maritime traffic, not tangle with the son of one of the most powerful shipping families in the Mediterranean. But as the other vessel came closer, I realized this was different. The boat was bigger than typical smuggling craft, maybe 60 feet long, and it was moving with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and why. More disturbing still, it seemed to be altering course to match mine, adjusting its heading as I adjusted mine, as if it was tracking me specifically, like it was hunting me. That's when the first chill of real fear ran down my spine, when I realized that this might not be a random encounter at all. Someone was out there in the darkness, someone who knew my habits, knew I liked to take the boat out after family events, knew I'd be alone. Someone who had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. I throttled up, pushing Athena's arrow to 7 miles per hour, her twin Mercury racing engines screaming into the night like banshees, announcing the arrival of doom. The bow lifted out of the water, and I was flying more than sailing. Skipping across the waves like physics was just a suggestion. Like the normal rules that governed the interaction of matter and energy had been suspended for my personal amusement. Behind me, the other boat matched my speed, its engine note deeper, more powerful than anything that should have been able to keep up with a racing boat designed for maximum velocity. Whoever was driving it knew what they were doing, knew these waters as well as I did, understood the currents and depths and hidden dangers that could turn a high-speed chase into a death sentence. The chase lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That felt like hours. 20 minutes of pure adrenaline and growing terror as I realized this wasn't just some coincidental encounter with people who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was planned, orchestrated, carried out by professionals who had studied my patterns and predicted my behavior with scientific precision. They knew I'd be alone that night. They knew I'd head toward Aegina. They knew the route I'd take, the speed I'd travel, the exact location where they could intercept me with maximum advantage and minimum risk of witnesses. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a carefully planned assassination attempt, and I was racing toward it at 80 miles per hour like a missile seeking its own target as I pushed the cigarette harder than I'd ever pushed her before, weaving between the smaller islands that dotted this part of the Aegean like a slalom course designed by a madman. I started to understand the full scope of what was happening. Someone wanted me dead, wanted it badly enough to risk everything on a single night's work. Someone who knew that killing Alexandros Dimitriou in his own element, on the water he loved more than life itself, would send a message that no amount of money or power or family influence could protect you once you'd been marked for elimination. But who? And why? I ran through the possibilities as I flew across the water, engines screaming, wake spreading behind me like the trail of a comet. Business competitors who might benefit from my death. Possible, but our company had always maintained relatively cordial relationships with our major rivals, understanding that the Mediterranean was big enough for everyone to make a profit. Political enemies of my father. More likely, but most politicians preferred subtler forms of warfare, scandals and investigations and tax audits, not high-speed boat chases that looked like something from a Hollywood action movie. Criminal organizations we might have crossed. That was a distinct possibility. Our shipping routes sometimes intersected with smuggling operations. And while we'd always been careful to maintain neutrality, maybe someone felt we knew too much, had seen too much, represented too much of a security risk to be left alive. Or maybe it was personal. Maybe I'd offended someone without realizing it, made an enemy through carelessness or arrogance or simple bad luck. Maybe there was a grievance I didn't even know existed, a slight awe injury that festered in someone's mind until they convinced themselves that murder was the only solution. The possibilities churned through my brain as I raced through the night, but all speculation ended when I saw how they'd positioned themselves for the final act. Instead of continuing the chase indefinitely, risking the attention of the Coast Guard or other boats that might witness what was happening, they'd predicted my route and set up an ambush. The end came suddenly, with the kind of brutal efficiency that suggested military training or at least extensive preparation. I was rounding the north point of Aegina, probably doing 80 miles per hour in water that should have been traversed at half that speed even in daylight, when they made their move. The spotlight hit me first, blinding white light that turned night into day and left me completely disoriented. Unable to see the water ahead or judge the distance to the shore, or even determine which direction was up. It was like being caught in the beam of some alien craft, suspended in a cone of illumination that stripped away every reference point and left me flying blind at suicidal speed. Then came the impact, and the world exploded into chaos. I never saw what they hit me with, never got a clear look at the weapon or device they used to destroy my boat. Some kind of ramming device, maybe a modified bow designed specifically to disable other vessels, or possibly an explosive charge triggered at the moment of maximum impact. The sound was like the world cracking in half, like every piece of metal and fiberglass and carbon fiber in the universe screaming in agony, as it was torn apart by forces beyond its ability to withstand. Athena's arrow, my beautiful, powerful, supposedly indestructible racing machine, came apart beneath me like a child's toy hit by a sledgehammer. One moment I was flying across the water like a Greek god on his chariot, master of speed and wind and wave. The next I was tumbling through space, feeling the warm sea rush up to meet me with what felt like malevolent intent. The water was surprisingly warm when I hit it, almost pleasant, like slipping into a bath after a long day. For a moment, I thought I might be okay, that my years of swimming and diving in these waters had prepared me for exactly this kind of emergency. I was strong, I was experienced. I knew how to survive in the sea, even under the worst conditions. But then I felt the blood, sticky and warm, flowing from somewhere on my head where debris from the explosion had caught me with the force of the baseball bat. My vision was blurring, my coordination was shot, and the taste of copper filled my mouth like I was sucking on a handful of pennies. Whatever they'd done to my boat, it had done significant damage to me as well, as I floated there, watching pieces of Athena's arrow drift past like the remnants of a shattered dream. I saw the other boats approaching slowly, cautiously. They were checking to make sure their job was done, making sure that Alexandros Dimitro, heir to a shipping fortune, son of one of the most powerful men in Greece, wouldn't be sailing home to claim his inheritance or to identify the people who had tried to take it from him. The last thing I remember clearly was sinking beneath the surface, the moonlight fracturing into silver shards above me as the sea claimed what it had been denied for 28 years. I'd always thought the ocean was my friend, my playground, my domain, the source of my family's fortune and the foundation of my identity. But as the darkness closed in and my lungs filled with salt water, I realized it had just been waiting for the right moment to collect what it was owed, to remind me that no amount of human arrogance could change the fact that the sea gives life and takes it away according to laws older than civilization itself. Everything after that was fragments, pieces of sensation floating in an endless black void like debris from a shipwreck scattered across the ocean floor. The feeling of being pulled from the water, rough hands on my broken body, voices shouting in Greek and other languages I couldn't identify. The rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air, growing louder and then fading, as I drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite consciousness and wasn't quite death. The sterile smell of a hospital, antiseptic and floor wax, and the particular odor of places where people went to heal or die. Machines beeping in rhythms that might have been my heartbeats, or my brainwaves, or just electronic noise designed to convince the living that medicine was more science than guesswork. People in white coats moving around me like ghosts, their voices distant and distorted, discussing my condition in medical terminology that might as well have been ancient Greek for all the sense it made to my damaged brain. But through it all, like a golden thread running through the darkness, like Ariadne's cord leading Theseus out of the labyrinth, was her voice. Alexandros, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. I couldn't squeeze anything. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even open my eyes. My body had become a prison, trapping my consciousness in darkness while the world continued without me. But I could hear her, and that voice became everything, became the anchor that kept me from drifting away completely, became the lighthouse that promised there was still a shore somewhere beyond the storm. It was comfort when the pain was too much to bear, and there was pain, waves of it crashing over me like tsunamis of pure agony that started in my head and radiated out through every nerve in my body. It was hope when the darkness felt infinite, when I couldn't remember who I was or where I came from or why any of it mattered. And it was love, though I couldn't remember what love was supposed to feel like. Couldn't recall ever experiencing anything like the warmth that spread through me when she spoke my name. The doctors say you might not remember things when you wake up, she said during what I would later learn was my second week in the coma. They say brain injuries can steal memories, steal pieces of who you are, leave you like a book with pages torn out. But I want you to know that I'll remember. For both of us, if I have to. I'll remember every moment, every laugh, every dream we shared. I'll be your memory until yours comes back. Who was she, in my broken state, floating between consciousness and oblivion? I created 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 stories to explain the voice that had become my lifeline. Maybe she was my girlfriend, though I couldn't remember having one. Couldn't recall the face or name or touch of any woman who might have claimed that role in my life. Maybe she was my wife, though I felt no wedding ring on my finger during the brief moments when sensation returned to my hands. No sense of the sacred bond that marriage was supposed to create between two souls. Maybe she was a nurse who had taken pity on me, one of those medical professionals who went beyond the call of duty to provide comfort to patients who had no one else. Or maybe she was a family friend fulfilling an obligation to my parents, sitting beside my bed because someone had to and she'd drawn the short straw. But she felt like more than any of those things. She felt like home, though I couldn't remember what home was supposed to feel like. She felt like safety in a world that had revealed itself to be infinitely dangerous. She felt like the answer to a question I didn't even know I'd been asking. "I brought you something today," she said, during what might have been week 3, though time had no meaning in the place where I was trapped. That grey space between sleeping and waking, where hours could feel like years and years could pass in what seemed like minutes. "It's a recording of the sea. I know how much you love the water, how you always said the sound of waves was better than any music ever written. I thought maybe if you could hear it, it might help you find your way back to us." The sound of gentle waves lapping against a shore filled the space around my hospital bed. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something like peace. It wasn't the wild, powerful Aegean that had nearly claimed my life, with its hidden currents and sudden storms, and infinite capacity for beauty and destruction. This was something gentler, more forgiving. Like the waves you might find in a protected cove where children played and lovers walked hand in hand, where the sea showed its nurturing face instead of its violent one. Safe waves, healing waves. Waves that whispered of second chances and new beginnings and the possibility that even the worst disasters might contain the seeds of unexpected redemption. "Do you remember when we used to walk on the beach at sunset?" she continued, and even though I couldn't remember, I could feel the truth of it in her voice, could sense the reality of shared experiences that had somehow been erased from my mind but not from hers. "You always said that was when the sea was most honest, when the day was ending and it didn't have to pretend to be anything other than what it was. Just water and salt and moonlight and infinite possibility." The words painted pictures in my damaged mind, images of a man and woman walking on sand still warm from the day's sun. The sky painted in shades of gold and crimson and purple that had no names. The eternal rhythm of waves providing a soundtrack to conversations about everything and nothing. About dreams for the future and memories of the past and the perfect. Contentment of being exactly where you were supposed to be with exactly the person you were meant to be with. Was that me? Was I capable of that kind of simple happiness, that basic human pleasure in beauty and companionship and the daily miracle of existing in a world that offered such gifts to anyone wise enough to notice them? The man in those imagined scenes felt like someone I might want to be, someone I might have been, someone I might still become if I could find my way back from the darkness that had claimed me. Subscribe if you want to hear more, because this story is just beginning. And the woman whose voice saved me from the darkness is about to reveal secrets that will change everything you think you know about love, memory, and second chances, about what it means to lose yourself and find something even better in the wreckage. The breakthrough came during my 4th week in the coma, though I wouldn't understand the significance of it until much later. Wouldn't recognize it as the first step in a journey that would take me places I never could have imagined. I'd been drifting in that strange space between consciousness and oblivion, aware enough to hear her voice, but unable to respond, unable to move, unable to do anything but exist in a state of pure listening. She was reading to me something in Greek that sounded like poetry, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the ancient language that had given birth to philosophy and democracy and theater and all the other foundations of Western civilization. The words washed over me. Like music, like incantations from some forgotten religion that promised healing and transformation and the restoration of everything that had been lost. Kappa Alpha Lambda, Eta Sigma Pi, Y Rho, Alpha, Alpha Gamma, Y Pi, Eta Mu Omicron, Upsilon, she said. And even though I couldn't remember what the words meant, they felt like coming home after a long journey. Like hearing your name called by someone who had been waiting for you longer than memory could measure. Good evening, my love. I know you're in there somewhere, fighting to come back. I can feel you listening, feel you trying to break through the darkness that's holding you prisoner. And then something shifted. Not in the room, not in the machines that monitored my broken body with their electronic vigilance, but in me. Like a door opening in a house that had been locked for months. Like light streaming into a cave that had known only darkness since the beginning of time. I could feel my fingers, really feel them, not just the vague sensation of existing, but the specific weight and warmth of human flesh. The particular miracle of being alive in a body that worked according to principles I'd never bothered to understand or appreciate. I felt that, she said, and there was wonder in her voice, excitement barely contained, like she'd witnessed something miraculous, something that doctors had told her might never happen. Your hand moved. Doctor, doctor, come quickly. He's responding. Footsteps rushed into the room, professional voices discussing vitals and responsiveness and cautious optimism. But all I cared about was her hand in mine, warm and real and alive, anchoring me to a world I was slowly remembering how to inhabit, proving that the connection between us was real and not just something my broken brain had constructed to survive the impossible darkness of existing without memory, without identity, without any sense of who I was or why I mattered. Alexandros, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand again. I squeezed. Not much, barely enough to register on whatever scale they use to measure such things, but enough to feel her fingers respond. Enough to know that I was real, she was real. And whatever was happening between us transcended the medical categories that doctors use to make sense of brain injuries and comas and the mysterious process by which consciousness returned to bodies that had been abandoned by their inhabiting spirits. Oh my God, she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. Tears of relief and joy and something else, something that sounded like a prayer being answered. You're coming back. You're actually coming back to me. Over the next few days, the world came back in pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle being assembled by someone who had infinite patience and a perfect memory of what the finished picture was supposed to look like. First, my sense of touch, the ability to feel the texture of sheets and the weight of blankets and the particular warmth that came from another person's hand holding mine. Then my ability to move my fingers and toes, small motions that required enormous effort, but that represented the first steps in reclaiming my body from whatever forces had taken possession of it during the long weeks of unconsciousness. Each successful movement felt like a victory, like proof that the human spirit could overcome even the most devastating trauma if it had sufficient reason to want to return to the land of the living. And finally, gloriously, the ability to open my eyes, to see light and shadow and color and form, to witness the world that existed beyond the darkness of my damaged mind. The hospital room was white and sterile, filled with machines and monitors and the smell of disinfectant that couldn't quite cover the underlying odors of sickness and fear and desperate hope. But none of that mattered because she was there, sitting beside my bed like a guardian angel. And she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Or at least, the most beautiful woman I could remember seeing, which amounted to the same thing since my memory had been wiped clean, leaving me with a consciousness as blank as a newborn child's, ready to be filled with whatever experiences and relationships the future might provide. She had dark hair that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hospital window, transforming it into something that seemed to glow with its own internal fire. Her eyes were the color of the Aegean on a perfect summer day, blue-green with depths that hinted at mysteries and secrets and stories worth spending a lifetime trying to understand. Her skin had the golden tone that came from hours spent outdoors, and when she realized I was looking at her, really looking at her with eyes that could see and brain that could process what they were seeing, her face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire city of Athens. She was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Nothing fancy or expensive, just fabric and thread arranged in a way that suggested grace, an intelligence, and the kind of natural beauty that didn't need ornamentation or artificial enhancement. Around her neck was a small silver pendant in the shape of an ancient Greek coin, the kind of jewelry that archaeologists and historians, and people who cared about the deep past wore to signal their connection to civilizations that had crumbled to dust millennia ago. Alexandros, she said, and hearing my name from her lips felt like remembering something I'd forgotten I'd lost. Like discovering that the most important word in any language was the one that identified you as a unique individual worthy of love and attention and care. Welcome back. I tried to speak, but my voice was gone, erased by weeks of not being used. My vocal cords as unused and uncertain as everything else in my body that had been dormant during my journey through the valley of shadows. All I could do was stare at her, this woman who had been my lifeline through the darkness, this voice that had kept me tethered to the world of the living when every rational part of my brain was telling me to let go, to stop fighting, to surrender to whatever peaceful oblivion was waiting beyond the boundaries of consciousness. Don't try to talk yet, she said, reaching for a cup of water with a straw, the kind of simple gesture that demonstrated both medical knowledge and genuine care. The doctors said your voice might take a few days to come back, but you're awake, you're responsive, and that's what matters. Everything else is just details that we can work out as we go. As she helped me take small sips of water, each one a revelation after weeks of four fluids and whatever nutrients they'd been feeding directly into my bloodstream. I studied her face with the intensity of someone seeing the world for the first time. I was looking for some spark of recognition, some memory that would tell me who she was and why her voice had been the only thing I could hold on to in the dark. Why her presence felt more essential than oxygen or food or any of the other things the human body supposedly needed to survive. But there was nothing. She was beautiful, she was kind. She clearly cared about me in a way that transcended professional obligation or casual friendship. But she was also a complete stranger, as foreign to my damaged memory as someone I'd never met, never spoken to, never shared a single moment of connection within all the years of my existence. The confusion must have shown on my face because her expression grew concerned, the kind of gentle worry that comes from watching someone you love struggle with challenges that you can't help them overcome. "Do you remember me?" she asked gently. "Do you remember anything about your life before the accident?" I shook my head and saw something that might have been pain flash across her features before she quickly composed herself, replacing whatever disappointment she felt with the kind of determined optimism that suggested she was prepared to fight for our relationship, even if I couldn't remember that a relationship existed. "That's okay," she said, though her voice was slightly strained, like someone trying to convince herself as much as me that everything would work out, despite evidence to the contrary. "The doctors warned us this might happen. Brain injuries can affect memory in unpredictable ways. Sometimes it comes back gradually, triggered by familiar sights or sounds or smells. Sometimes it returns all at once, like a dam breaking and flooding the mind with everything that had been held back. And sometimes," she paused, unable to finish the sentence, unable to voice the possibility that both of us were thinking but neither wanted to acknowledge, "sometimes it never comes back. Sometimes the person you were before the accident is gone forever, leaving only a stranger wearing a familiar face. Someone who has to build an entirely new identity from scratch, while everyone around them mourns the loss of someone who looked exactly like the person standing in front of them, but who no longer existed in any meaningful sense." A man in a white coat entered the room then, tall and distinguished with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from years of delivering both good news and bad to families caught in medical crises they never saw coming. Behind him came two other people, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a woman wearing jewelry that suggested she'd never encountered a problem that money and social position couldn't solve. "Alexandros," the doctor said, "I'm Dr. Papadopoulos, and I've been overseeing your care since you were brought in. These are your parents, Nikos and Alina Dimitriou." "My parents?" I looked at them, searching for some flicker of recognition, some sense of belonging or love or family connection that would pierce through the fog of my damaged memory and remind me who I was, where I came from, what relationships and responsibilities and dreams had shaped the person I'd been before someone decided to erase me from existence. The man had my eyes, or rather, I had his. The same deep brown color with flecks of gold that caught the light when he was thinking. The woman had the kind of regal bearing that suggested she'd been born to wealth and privilege, raised in a world where servants anticipated your needs and problems were solved with phone calls to the right people. They looked relieved to see me awake and responsive, grateful that their son had survived what should have been a fatal accident. But they also looked afraid, afraid of what I might remember, afraid of what I might never remember, afraid of the implications of having an heir to a business empire, who couldn't recall anything about the empire he was supposed to inherit, or the enemies who might have tried to prevent that inheritance from taking place. "My boy," the man said, and his voice was heavy with emotion, with years of hopes and plans and expectations that might have to be revised or abandoned depending on how much of their son they'd gotten back. "We thought we'd lost you when the Coast Guard called to say they'd found you floating in the water. When the doctors said your injuries were so severe that you might never wake up, we prepared ourselves for the worst. Having you back, having you alive and awake, it's more than we dared to hope for. How long?" I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper after weeks of disuse. 6 weeks, Dr. Papadopoulos said. "You've been in a induced coma for 6 weeks while your brain healed from the trauma you suffered. Your injuries were severe, traumatic brain injury from what appears to have been a high-speed boat accident. But you're alive, and your cognitive functions seem to be intact. That's what matters most." Boat accident. The words stirred something in the darkness of my missing memories, like wind rippling the surface of a still pond, but nothing concrete emerged. Just a sense of speed, of water, of something going terribly wrong on a night that should have been perfect, that should have been just another adventure in a life that had been full of adventures up until the moment when adventure turned into catastrophe. Do I... I paused, struggling to form the words, to ask the question that would determine whether the person I'd been before the accident could be recovered, or whether I'd have to start over completely, building a new identity from whatever fragments of personality and instinct had survived the destruction of my memory. Do I remember anything? The doctor exchanged glances with my parents before answering, the kind of look that passes between medical professionals and family members when the truth is complicated and potentially devastating. Memory loss is common with injuries like yours, he said carefully. Some patients recover everything within days or weeks. Others take months or even years to fully regain their memories. And some patients find that certain memories never return, though they're usually able to form new memories and live normal, productive lives. I looked at the beautiful woman sitting beside my bed, the one whose voice had been my salvation, the one who had somehow become the most important person in my world, despite the fact that I couldn't remember a single moment we'd shared. Are you? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer, afraid that whatever relationship we'd had might be too fragile to survive the complete absence of shared memory on my part. The question hung in the air like a physical thing, heavy with implications and possibilities and the potential for either heartbreak or hope. I saw her face crumble slightly before she forced another smile, the kind of expression worn by people who are determined to be strong even when strength feels impossible. I'm Isadora, she said simply. Isadora Regas. I'm someone who cares about you very much. The way she said it, the hesitation, the careful choice of words, told me there was more to the story, layers of meaning and history that couldn't be conveyed in a simple introduction. But before I could ask for more details, my mother stepped forward. Darling, you need to rest, she said. The doctor says you shouldn't strain yourself trying to remember everything at once. Memory recovery is a gradual process, and pushing too hard too fast could actually impede your progress. It will come back in time, I'm sure of it. But I could see in their faces that they weren't sure of anything, that my recovery was as much a mystery to them as it was to me. And as the days passed and the gaps in my memory remained stubbornly empty, I began to wonder if the person I had been before the accident was gone forever, leaving only this shell inhabited by fragments and the echo of a voice that had kept me alive when dying would have been easier. The only thing I knew for certain was that Isadora's voice had saved me. In a world where everything else was uncertain, where my own name felt foreign and my own face in the mirror looked like a stranger's, her voice was the one constant, the one truth I could hold on to while everything else shifted and changed and refused to make sense. But who was she to me? And why, when I looked at her, did I feel like I was looking at everything I'd ever wanted but could never quite remember having? The answers, I would soon discover, were more complicated and more dangerous than anything my injured brain could have imagined. And the accident that had stolen my memory hadn't been an accident at all. The first few days after waking up were like learning to be human all over again. Simple things that should have been automatic, like recognizing the taste of water or understanding that the rectangle of light on the wall was a window, required conscious effort. But the hardest part wasn't relearning how to exist in my own body. The hardest part was looking at Isadora and feeling this overwhelming sense of connection to someone who might as well have been a stranger. She was there every day, arriving early in the morning with fresh flowers, always different ones, always chosen with care. White jasmine that filled the room with the scent of Greek summers, red roses that reminded me of something I couldn't quite grasp, yellow daffodils that seemed to carry promises of spring and renewal. She would arrange them in a vase by the window, humming softly while she worked, melodies that felt familiar even though I couldn't name them. Music was always important to you, she explained one afternoon when I asked about the songs. You said that every island in the Aegean had its own melody, and if you listened carefully enough, you could hear them all harmonizing together into something bigger than any single tune. She brought me books written in Greek, though I had to relearn how to read my own language, the letters swimming on the page like strange hieroglyphs, until slowly, painfully, they began to make sense again. She brought me music, classical pieces that she said were my favorites, though they sounded like noise to my recovering brain at first. Gradually, though, certain melodies began to resonate, stirring something deep in my chest that felt like memory trying to surface. Most importantly, she brought me photos, hundreds of them, printed on good paper, organized in albums that told the story of a life I couldn't remember living. There was the couple at the Acropolis, standing in front of the Parthenon with their arms around each other, looking like they owned the world. There was a man who had my face teaching a woman who looked like Isadora how to steer a boat, both of them laughing as spray splashed over the bow. There were dinner parties and family gatherings, beach vacations and mountain hikes, formal events, where the man in the photos wore expensive suits and the woman wore elegant dresses. "This is us at the Panathenaic Stadium," she said one afternoon, holding up a picture of the couple running together on an ancient track. "You'd signed us up for the Athens Classic Marathon without telling me, said you wanted us to run the same route as the original Olympic messengers." I was furious at first, but by the end, it was one of the most romantic things anyone had ever done for me. I studied the photo, looking for some flicker of recognition, some sense that this moment had belonged to me. The man in the picture looked confident, happy, complete in a way that I couldn't imagine ever feeling. The woman was unmistakably Isadora, younger maybe, her hair shorter, but with the same radiant smile that could light up entire rooms. "We look happy," I said finally, because I didn't know what else to say. "We were," she replied, and there was something in her voice that made me look up from the photo. "We were planning to get married this Christmas. You had already picked out the ring, hidden it in your bedroom safe. You were going to propose when I got back from my research expedition to Delos, married." The word hit me like a physical blow, not because it was unpleasant, but because it felt so significant and so completely foreign at the same time. This beautiful woman, who had spent 6 weeks talking me back from the edge of oblivion, was supposed to be my fiancée, and I couldn't remember a single moment we'd shared. Couldn't recall the first time we'd met, or the first time we'd kissed, or the moment when I'd realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt inadequate. "I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember you, remember us, remember what it felt like to love someone that much." "Don't apologize," she said quickly, reaching for my hand. "The doctors say memory can return in fragments, triggered by familiar sensations or emotions. Sometimes it's a smell, sometimes a piece of music, sometimes just being in a place that was important to you. We just have to be patient and trust that whatever was between us was strong enough to survive this." But I could see the strain in her eyes, the effort it took to maintain hope when the man she loved had become a stranger wearing a familiar face. And I could feel my own frustration building, not just at the lost memories, but at the growing sense that there were things people weren't telling me. Important things that everyone seemed to dance around without ever addressing directly, like why my parents seemed so uncomfortable whenever Isadora was in the room, exchanging meaningful glances when they thought I wasn't watching, like why there were always 2 security guards posted outside my hospital room, professional-looking men in dark suits who nodded politely but never smiled. Like why Dr. Papadopoulos asked carefully worded questions about what I remembered about the night of the accident, as if my answers might reveal something dangerous. "There's something you're not telling me," I said one evening when Isadora was getting ready to leave. "All of you, my parents, the doctors, even you. I can feel it in the way you look at each other, in the things you don't say." She paused in the middle of putting on her coat, her hands stilling on the buttons. "What do you mean?" "I mean that normal boat accidents don't require security guards. Normal memory loss doesn't make doctors look worried every time they examine me. And normal relationships don't make parents act like they're afraid of their son's girlfriend." She sat back down, her expression growing serious. "You're right. There are things we haven't told you, things we didn't want to burden you with while you were still recovering. But maybe it's time you knew the truth." "What truth?" Before she could answer, there was a knock on the door, and a man I didn't recognize entered the room. He was young, maybe my age, with the kind of casual confidence that comes from a life without real consequences. He was wearing expensive clothes that somehow managed to look effortless. Designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. When he saw me propped up in bed, his face broke into a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Alexandros, you beautiful bastard," he said, striding over to embrace me before I could react. "I can't believe you're finally awake. Do you have any idea how worried we've all been?" I looked at Isadora, hoping for some guidance, but her expression had gone carefully neutral, the kind of diplomatic mask people wear when they're trying not to reveal their true feelings. "I'm sorry," I said to the stranger. "I don't remember who you are." His grin faltered slightly. "It's me, man, Kostas Petridis. We've been best friends since university. I was supposed to be your best man at the wedding." Wedding, there was that word again, casual and loaded at the same time. I looked at this Kostas character, trying to find some spark of recognition, some sense of the friendship he claimed we'd shared. He was handsome in the way that rich young men often were, with perfect teeth and expensive haircuts, and the kind of tan that came from spending winters in places where the sun always shone. But there was something about him that made me uncomfortable. Something in his eyes or his smile or the way he carried himself that felt false, like he was performing a role rather than expressing genuine emotion. "I'm sorry," I said again. "I don't remember." The doctor said his memory might be affected. Isadora said carefully, "We're hoping it will come back gradually." "Of course it will," Kostas said, but I caught him exchanging a meaningful look with Isadora. "The important thing is that you're alive. When they pulled you out of the water that night, when they found pieces of Athena's arrow scattered across half the Aegean, we thought, ... He stopped, shaking his head. "Well, it doesn't matter what we thought. You're here, you're awake, and that's what counts." "What exactly happened that night?" I asked. "Everyone keeps saying it was a boat accident, but no one has given me the details. And why won't anyone explain why I have security guards outside my room?" Another look passed between Kostas and Isadora, this one longer and more loaded with unspoken communication. "You took the cigarette out alone," Kostas said finally. "It was late, probably after midnight. The official story is that you hit something. maybe another vessel or some debris. But the truth is, no one knows exactly what happened. The boat was destroyed, completely torn apart. The Coast Guard found you floating about 2 miles offshore, near Aegina. If that fishing boat hadn't spotted you when they did. But I was a good sailor, I said, though I wasn't sure how I knew. That wasn't I, the best coasters confirmed. That's what made it so shocking. You knew those waters like the back of your hand. You could navigate them blindfolded. Hell, you'd made that exact run to Aegina dozens of times without incident. So, what went wrong? That's what everyone would like to know, said a new voice from the doorway. And we all turned to see a middle-aged woman in a police uniform. She was tall, authoritative, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd spent years separating truth from lies. Behind her was a younger man, also in uniform, carrying a folder thick with documents. "Mr. Dimitriou, I'm Captain Sophia Vassilou, Hellenic Coast Guard," she said, showing her badge. "This is Lieutenant Andreas Nomiku. We've been investigating your accident." The word investigating hung in the air like a question mark. Accidents didn't usually require investigation unless there was reason to believe they weren't accidents at all. "Captain," my mother said, appearing behind the Coast Guard officer. "I thought we agreed that Alexandros wasn't ready for this kind of questioning, Mrs. Dimitriou, your son has been conscious for over a week. His physical condition has stabilized, and we need to understand what happened that night. There are aspects of this case that don't add up, and every day we delay makes it less likely that we'll find the people responsible." I felt Isadora's hand tighten around mine, and when I looked at her, I saw something that might have been fear flash across her features. "People responsible?" I asked. "What do you mean?" Captain Vassilou stepped into the room, removing a small notebook from her jacket pocket. "Mr. Dimitriou, we have reason to believe that what happened to you wasn't an accident. We think someone deliberately attempted to kill you." The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and the distant sound of hospital life continuing in the corridors beyond. I felt like I was sinking again, drowning in implications I couldn't fully understand. "Your boat was found in pieces, scattered across nearly a square mile of ocean," Lieutenant Nomiku added, opening his folder. "The damage pattern was consistent with a high-speed collision, but we haven't been able to identify what you collided with. There were no other vessels reported in distress that night, no debris fields that would suggest another accident. Maybe I hit a rock," I suggested, "or some kind of floating debris." "The depth charts showed deep water in the area where you were found," Captain Vassilou said, "over 100 meters deep, and our divers have swept the ocean floor. There's nothing there that could have caused that kind of damage." She consulted her notes. "There's also the matter of your injuries. You suffered severe head trauma, but the pattern of the wounds suggests blunt force impact, not the kind of injuries we'd expect from a typical boat crash. It looks more like someone hit you with a weapon." "What are you saying?" Isadora asked, and I could hear tension creeping into her voice. "I'm saying that we need to consider the possibility that Mr. Dimitriou's accident wasn't accidental, that someone may have deliberately attacked him, tried to kill him, and make it look like a boating mishap. Who would want to hurt Alexandros?" my mother protested. "He's never harmed anyone in his life." Captain Vassilou gave her a look that was both sympathetic and skeptical. "Mrs. Dimitriou, your son is the heir to one of the largest shipping companies in the Mediterranean. He was about to take control of trade routes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In that world, there are plenty of people who might see him as a threat. That's ridiculous, Kostas said. But there was something in his voice that suggested he didn't entirely believe his own words. Sure, the shipping business is competitive, but this isn't some crime movie. People don't kill each other over commercial disputes, don't they? Lieutenant Nomiku said. In the past 5 years, we've investigated 17 suspicious deaths or disappearances involving major maritime businesses in the Eastern Mediterranean. Ship owners, port managers, customs officials, cargo brokers. Most were ruled accidental or unsolved, but the pattern is unmistakable. What pattern? I asked. Someone is consolidating control of shipping routes, Captain Vassilou explained. Eliminating competition, removing obstacles, clearing the way for a single organization to dominate Mediterranean trade. Your family's company represents one of the largest independent operations still standing. The implications of what she was saying began to sink in. Someone wasn't just trying to kill me personally, they were trying to destroy my entire family's legacy, to erase 3 generations of work and dreams and carefully built relationships. We need to explore every possibility, the captain continued. Your family's business interests are extensive. You have competitors, partners, people who might benefit from your absence. We need to know who had access to your schedule that night. Who knew you'd be taking the boat out? Who might have been able to predict your route? But Alexandros doesn't remember anything, my mother said desperately. How can he help with an investigation when he can't even remember what he had for breakfast yesterday? Sometimes trauma victims remember things in unexpected ways, Captain Vassilou replied. A smell, a sound, an emotion can trigger memories that seem completely lost. I'd like to arrange for Mr. Demetriou to visit the site where we found him. See if being on the water might help him remember something about that night. Absolutely not, my father said, entering the conversation for the first time. He'd been standing in the doorway, listening. But now he stepped forward with the kind of authority that had built shipping empires and intimidated competitors for decades. My son nearly died. I'm not putting him back on a boat until we know exactly what happened and who was responsible. Mr. Dimitri, with respect, avoiding the water won't bring back his memories or help us find the people who did this to him. And if this was an attack, if someone wanted your son dead, they might try again. Staying hidden in this hospital room won't protect him indefinitely. The words hit me like ice water. Someone had tried to kill me, and they might try again. Looked around the room at the faces of people who claimed to love me, to know me, to want to protect me, and I realized that my lost memory wasn't just a medical inconvenience. It was a liability that could get me killed, could put everyone I cared about in danger. I want to go, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. I want to see where it happened. Alexandros, no, Isadora said immediately. It's too dangerous. What if being there triggers a panic attack? Or what if your condition gets worse? What if whoever tried to kill you is watching, waiting for you to leave the safety of the hospital? What if it doesn't? What if seeing the place helps me remember something important, something that could identify the people who did this? Looked at Captain Vassilou. You think someone tried to murder me? If that's true, then sitting in this hospital room, pretending everything is fine, isn't going to keep me safe forever. I need to know what happened. I need to remember. The captain nodded approvingly. We can take every precaution. Medical team on standby, Coast Guard escort, controlled environment. If you start to experience any distress, we bring you back immediately. This is insane, my mother said. Nikos, tell them this is insane. But my father was looking at me with something that might have been pride. The boy is right, Alina. We can't hide from this forever. If someone tried to kill our son, I want to know who and why, and I want them to pay for what they've done." "Then it's settled," Captain Vassiliou said. "We'll arrange the trip for tomorrow morning, assuming Dr. Papadopoulos clears you for the journey." After the police left, the room remained tense with unspoken fears and unasked questions. Kostas made an excuse about needing to get back to work, but not before squeezing my shoulder and saying, "Be careful out there, brother, and trust your instincts. They've always been good, even when the rest of us thought you were crazy." My parents left shortly after, my mother clearly distressed and my father lost in thought, probably already making phone calls to security companies and private investigators. That left me alone with Isadora, who had been unusually quiet since the captain's visit. "You're scared," I observed. "Of course I'm scared," she said. "The man I love nearly died, and now we're finding out it might not have been an accident. Of course I'm terrified." "The man I love," she said it so naturally, so simply, that for a moment I felt like I could almost remember what it was like to be loved by her, to love her in return. But the feeling was like trying to hold water in my hands, there for an instant and then gone. "Tell me about us," I said. "Not the facts, not the timeline of our relationship. Tell me what it felt like to be in love with each other." She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Athens skyline, where the Acropolis glowed golden in the late afternoon sun, like a beacon from the ancient world. "You were the most infuriating man I'd ever met," she said finally, and I could hear a smile in her voice. "Arrogant, reckless, absolutely convinced that the world existed for your entertainment. When we first met, I thought you were everything wrong with wealthy men rolled into one insufferable package. That doesn't sound like the beginning of a love story. It wasn't supposed to be. I was working as a marine archaeologist, cataloging shipwrecks in the Aegean for the Ministry of Culture. Your family's shipping company was expanding their routes, and there were concerns about disturbing historically significant sites. You were supposed to be my liaison, helping me identify areas where ancient vessels might be located, and you showed up 3 hours late to our first meeting, wearing board shorts and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." You had sand in your hair and you smelled like sunscreen and motor oil. You looked like you'd rather be anywhere else in the world than in a stuffy government office talking about ancient pottery. I tried to imagine myself as she described, tried to picture this arrogant playboy who had somehow won the heart of this obviously intelligent, accomplished woman. It was like trying to imagine a character from a book, someone who happened to share my name and face, but was otherwise a complete stranger. "What changed your mind about me?" "You listened," she said simply. "Everyone else in your world talked. Past me, over me, around me. They saw a woman with a PhD in archaeology and assumed I was either looking for a rich husband or playing at having a career until I found one. But you actually listened when I talked about my work, asked intelligent questions, remembered details from previous conversations. And when I showed you the site of a Byzantine merchant vessel we'd discovered off Hydra, you understood why it mattered. Because of the history, because of the people. You said that every shipwreck was a story about someone's life being interrupted, someone's dreams ending up on the ocean floor. You said that understanding how they lived and died was a way of honoring them, of making sure they weren't forgotten. Most people see archaeology as dusty artifacts in museums, but you saw it as detective work, as a way of solving mysteries that had been waiting centuries for someone to care enough to find the answers. The man she was describing sounded nothing like the arrogant playboy she'd introduced, and nothing like the wealthy heir everyone else seemed to remember. He sounded like someone I might actually want to be, someone who cared about more than just money and power and personal pleasure. When did you know you loved me? Her smile grew softer, more private, like she was remembering something precious. The night you took me to see the sea caves near Hydra. We were in your speedboat, and you said you wanted to show me something that no tourist would ever see, something that wasn't in any guidebook or archaeological survey. We anchored in this hidden cove that could only be accessed at low tide, and you produced a diving light and a waterproof camera. Why? Because you'd found the entrance to a submerged cave system that dated back to the Minoan period. You'd been exploring it on your own for months, but you wanted me to see it because you thought I might be able to help date some of the artifacts you'd found inside. I felt a stirring of something that might have been memory, or might just have been wishful thinking. What was in the cave? Pottery shards, ancient anchors, coins from a dozen different civilizations. It was like stepping into a museum that had been hidden underwater for 3,000 years. Roman amphorae next to Phoenician trade goods, Greek ceramics mixed with Egyptian jewelry. A crossroads of ancient commerce preserved by accident in an underwater vault. But that wasn't why you fell in love with me. No, I fell in love with you because while we were exploring, cataloging these incredible ancient artifacts, you found a piece of ceramic that clearly didn't belong with the rest. It was modern, probably from a fishing net or some tourist's broken coffee mug that had fallen overboard. And instead of ignoring it or throwing it away, you carefully bagged it and labeled it with the same attention you'd given to a 2,000-year-old Greek kylix. Why? Because you said even modern garbage had stories to tell, and maybe someday someone would want to know what people in our time were throwing into the sea. You said that archaeologists 500 years from now would be just as curious about us as we were about the ancient Greeks, and every piece of evidence mattered, no matter how insignificant it seemed. The way she told it, with such specific detail and obvious affection, made me want desperately to remember that moment. To remember being the kind of person who would care about ancient artifacts and modern garbage with equal attention to their stories. I sound like someone worth loving, I said. You were. You are. She took my hand again, and this time I didn't feel like a stranger was touching me. I felt like someone was trying to anchor me to a life I'd lost but might still be able to find again. The accident took your memories, Alexandros, but it didn't take who you are at your core. That person is still in there somewhere, waiting to remember what it feels like to care about something bigger than yourself. How can you be so sure? Because you asked me to tell you what it felt like to love you, not what we did together or where we went. Because you're worried about the other people involved in the investigation, not just yourself. Because you want to go back to the place where you almost died, not to prove how brave you are, but because you think it might help you remember something that could protect the people you care about. She was right, I realized. Those were exactly the reasons I wanted to face the scene of the accident. Not for glory or to prove anything, but because understanding what had happened to me might be the key to keeping it from happening to someone else, might be the first step in stopping whoever was trying to destroy everything my family had built. What if I never remember? I asked. What if the person you fell in love with is gone forever? Then I'll fall in love with whoever you become, she said without hesitation. Because the thing about love, real love, is that it's not just about who someone was. It's about who they could be, who they are when they think no one is watching, who they choose to be when everything else is taken away. Before I could respond, There was a soft knock on the door, and Dr. Papadopoulos entered with a chart in his hands and a serious expression on his face. "I've reviewed Captain Vassilou's request," he said without preamble. "Medically speaking, I think the trip could be beneficial. Sometimes returning to the site of a trauma can help unlock repressed memories. However, there are risks. Being on the water might trigger a panic response, especially if you do start to remember what happened. We'll need to take a full medical team, and you'll need to promise me that if you experience any distress, any discomfort, anything that doesn't feel right, you'll let us know immediately." "I promise," I said. "There's one more thing," the doctor continued. "I've been reviewing your test results, and there are some anomalies I want to discuss. Your brain scans show damage consistent with the recent accident, but there are also indicators that suggest you may have suffered previous head trauma, possibly years ago." "What kind of previous trauma?" "It's hard to say without more extensive testing, but there are scar patterns in your brain tissue that suggest you may have experienced one or more significant concussions earlier in your life. The kind of injuries that might result from serious accidents or other causes." I looked at Isadora, but her expression was as confused as I felt. "I don't remember Alexandros ever having any serious accidents," she said. "He was always careful when it came to sailing or diving or any kind of physical activity. If he'd suffered major head injuries, I would have known about it. It's possible the injuries occurred during childhood or during activities that seemed minor at the time but actually caused more damage than anyone realized," Dr. Papadopoulos explained. "The brain is remarkably resilient, but it also keeps a record of every trauma it endures. Sometimes those old injuries can complicate recovery from new ones." "Could the previous injuries affect my memory recovery?" "Possibly. Brain injuries can interact in complex ways. Sometimes old damage creates vulnerabilities that make new injuries more severe. Other times, the brain develops alternative pathways that actually help with recovery. We won't know which scenario applies to you until we see how your healing progresses." He closed the chart and looked at me seriously. "Mr. Dumitru, I want you to understand that tomorrow's trip is not without risk, but staying in this hospital room, protected from everything that might trigger a memory, isn't without risk either. At some point, you need to start living your life again, even if it's a different life than the one you lived before." That night, alone in my hospital bed, while Isadora had finally gone home to shower and sleep in her own apartment, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what the next day would bring. Would being on the water help me remember? Would I recall the faces of my attackers, the details of that terrifying chase, the moment when everything went wrong? Or would I just be traumatized all over again, forced to relive a horror I couldn't even remember experiencing the first time? But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the city beyond my window, I realized that the fear wasn't really about remembering the accident. The fear was about discovering that the person I'd been before wasn't someone I wanted to be again. What if recovering my memory meant losing the connection I was starting to feel with Isadora? What if remembering my old life meant giving up the possibility of building a new one? And what if the people who had tried to kill me were still out there, watching, waiting for me to remember something that would expose them? What if tomorrow's trip to the site of the accident wasn't a step toward recovery, but a step toward finishing what they'd started? I closed my eyes and tried to find sleep, but all I could hear was the echo of Isadora's voice from those first days in the coma, calling me back from the darkness, promising me that I wasn't alone. Tomorrow, I would find out if that promise was strong enough to protect me from whatever was waiting in the waters of the Aegean. strong enough to guide me back to a truth that someone had been willing to kill to keep buried. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because tomorrow's journey is going to reveal secrets that will change everything. And you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens when a man with no memory faces the place where someone tried to erase him from existence entirely.